The final moments of King Charles II of Spain were grim, but the horrific truth uncovered in the aftermath of his passing was so disturbing it would reshape our understanding of a dynasty's collapse. What the royal physicians found hidden within his body was more than a medical curiosity. It was the physical manifesto of a royal family's fatal obsession, written in deformed flesh and withered organs. His story represents the catastrophic finale of the mighty Spanish Habsburg dynasty. For well over a century, this family had controlled a global empire upon which the sun truly never set. Charles was destined from the cradle to be its future, its shining successor. Yet from his very first breath, he was, in fact, its most profound and tragic failure, a living testament to a lineage turning in upon itself. He was never expected to live through infancy, let alone reign. His rule would prove to be heartbreakingly brief, mired in sorrow, and ultimately a catalyst for the destruction of everything it touched. Born in the autumn of 1661, Charles entered a world where his family's immense power was already cracking at the foundations. His father, the aging King Philip IV, had watched numerous infant sons from his first marriage perish. The king's second union, to his own niece, Mariana of Austria, was a strategic move meant to solidify Habsburg bloodlines, but it yielded little more hope for a robust heir. This marriage was less a romance and more a genetic consolidation. For generations, the Habsburgs had practiced a strategy of deliberate intermarriage, a political tool to keep power and territory within the family. What began as a maneuver for control slowly became a prison of heredity. Charles's own parents, uncle and niece, were a classic example. This relentless circular pattern of inbreeding amplified hidden, recessive traits with each successive generation. The infant prince, therefore, was not merely frail. He was a collection of genetic compromises. His body was a battlefield from the start, besieged by one affliction after another. His childhood was a relentless parade of mortality. He endured measles, chickenpox, rubella, and the ever-present terror of smallpox in his earliest years, battling each and miraculously surviving. Each illness left its subtle, damaging mark on a system already struggling to function. Yet, disease was not his only foe. He developed rickets, a crippling condition that softens and weakens the bones, often due to a profound deficiency of sunlight and nourishment. He was forced to wear painful, cumbersome leg braces until he was at least 5 years old, a pitiful sight for a royal heir. But one physical signature defined him more vividly than any childhood malady. It was the notorious Habsburg jaw. This pronounced, grossly protruding lower jaw and lip was the family's unmistakable trademark, a bony heirloom passed down with grim consistency. It was likely the direct result of their closed genetic loop. While many ancestors displayed it, Charles possessed its most extreme and debilitating form. It wasn't just a facial feature, it was a functional deformity. Contemporaries wrote that his lower jaw jutted out so severely from his upper that he could not mesh his teeth together. The simple vital act of chewing food was nearly impossible for him. His reported solution was as tragic as it was grotesque. He would often swallow his meals whole, leading to a lifetime of digestive agony, cramps, and stomach complaints. Compounding this was an enlarged tongue, which made his speech slurred, thick, and difficult for anyone to understand. Some court records suggest he could not form intelligible words until the age of 4, and he was coddled and treated as a helpless infant long past the age of 10. With such a plight, is it any mystery that his own subjects referred to him in whispers as El Hechizado, the bewitched one? When his father, Philip IV, died in 1665, a frail 4-year-old Charles was draped in the mantle of monarchy. Actual power immediately flowed to his mother, Mariana, who installed herself as regent. The Spain Charles nominally inherited was a colossus with feet of clay, geographically vast, but institutionally and economically crumbling. The devastating effects of the Little Ice Age had ruined agricultural yields for decades, starving the treasury and the populace. The once feared empire was now deeply in debt and humiliatingly dependent on financial and political rivals like France, England, and the Dutch Republic. As Charles painfully grew into adolescence, it became painfully clear to the watching court and foreign ambassadors that he would never be a true autonomous ruler. The real levers of power were pulled by a rotating cast of court advisors, manipulative ministers, and his formidable mother. Diplomats from other nations sometimes noted the king could be amiable, even generous in person. But they more frequently described a profoundly insecure, shy, and melancholy figure, prone to bouts of listlessness and depression. His role had been whittled down to a single, desperate function: to marry and, against all odds, produce a successor. At 18, a politically expedient match was engineered. His bride was to be Marie-Louise of Orléans, the vibrant niece of Europe's most powerful monarch, France's Sun King, Louis XIV. Young, beautiful, and cultured, she was the darling of the sophisticated French court. She was also reportedly in love with a cousin, and was utterly devastated by the command to leave everything for a Spanish king whispered to be physically and mentally incapable. She wept for weeks upon receiving the news. Their marriage proceeded by proxy in 1679, followed by a formal ceremony later that year. Despite the cold political calculation and her initial despair, a poignant personal tragedy unfolded. By all surviving accounts, Charles fell deeply, genuinely, and wholly in love with his young queen. His devotion to her would remain constant, a solitary beam of light in his otherwise dark life. For nearly a decade, the royal couple tried with increasing desperation to conceive a child. The court, and indeed all of Europe, watched and waited. The blame for the barren union was placed squarely on Marie-Louise, as was the cruel custom of the time, never on the king. She was a pawn in a dynasty's desperate final endgame. In response to the crushing pressure, Marie-Louise subjected herself to a brutal regime of archaic fertility treatments, consuming potions and substances that poisoned her system and caused severe intestinal distress, all in a futile attempt to force a pregnancy. The toll was terrible. In February of 1689, after a routine ride, she was struck by vicious abdominal pain, then convulsions and relentless vomiting. Physicians quickly realized they were powerless. Charles rushed to her side as she lay dying. Her reported final words to him were a heartbreaking testament. "Your Majesty may have many wives, but none shall ever love you more than I." Many at court, paranoid and fearful of Spain's enemies, immediately suspected poison. Modern historians, however, examining the symptoms, are almost certain she died from acute appendicitis, a condition her harsh fertility treatments may have tragically exacerbated. Her death plunged the Spanish court into pure panic. The succession was no closer to being secured. With staggering speed, Charles's mother orchestrated a second marriage. The new bride was Maria Anna of Neuburg, chosen not for love, but for her staunch Austrian Habsburg connections and her virulent hatred of France. She also came with a tangible, marketable hope. She hailed from a famously fertile family, boasting 16 siblings. At 22, she seemed to possess both the biological potential and the time to finally give Spain its heir. But Maria Anna was no passive vessel. She was shrewd, cunning, and acutely aware she was a last-ditch effort for the dynasty. To protect herself from the blame that felled her predecessor, she engaged in a brazen deception. She frequently and publicly claimed to be pregnant, even when no child materialized. This theatrical performance was often enough to keep the court's accusing eyes shifted back toward the king's presumed inadequacy. As the years of Charles's second childless marriage dragged on, Spain's external crises deepened. In 1690, the kingdom was dragged into the 9 Years' War against France. The conflict was financially disastrous. Spain declared bankruptcy in 1692, and by 1696 had lost significant territory, including much of Catalonia. The very reason for the continent's simmering tension was Charles's own fragile body and his empty nursery. Every major power in Europe was poised for conflict, knowing that the death of this ailing, heirless king would shatter the continental balance of power, igniting a scramble for the Spanish inheritance. In 1696, Charles's primary pillar, his mother Mariana, died. One might have expected the king to finally grasp the reins of authority. Instead, he receded further, and the vacuum was filled forcefully by his second wife, Maria Anna. She now championed the Austrian faction at court, battling relentlessly against those nobles and ministers who favored a French succession. The entire court became a snake pit of intrigue, all revolving around one morbid question: who would follow Charles? In 1698, after the king suffered a terrifyingly severe illness, Europe forced the issue. Under immense pressure, Charles named a compromise heir, Joseph Ferdinand, the young Prince of Bavaria. This was a victory for Maria Anna and her Austrian allies. Charles's will went further, appointing Maria Anna as the boy's regent, should he inherit while still a minor. When this clause was read aloud, the Spanish court met the news with a cold, profound silence of disapproval. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, it was not Charles who died next. In 1699, the designated heir, Joseph Ferdinand, succumbed to a sudden illness. Europe was thrown back into frantic, urgent diplomacy. A new successor was chosen, Maria Anna's own nephew, Archduke Charles of Austria. Her faction was again ascendant, but the clock was ticking inexorably. By October of 1700, Charles's beleaguered body began its final surrender. After a lifetime of digestive torment, he lost the ability to eat altogether. He withered away in full view of his courtiers. On his deathbed, a final, decisive conspiracy was hatched. Ministers from the opposing French faction, seeing their moment, pressed the enfeebled, moribund king. They persuaded him to tear up his previous will and name a new heir, Philip, Duke of Anjou, grandson of King Louis XIV of France. On November 1st, 1700, just weeks before his 39th birthday, Charles II of Spain finally died. His wife, Maria Anna, was swiftly exiled. The war everyone had dreaded for decades, the War of the Spanish Succession, exploded across Europe and lasted for 13 brutal years. When the dust settled, Spain had lost its European territories, and the global hegemony of the Spanish Habsburgs was erased forever. In the days following the king's death, court physicians performed a thorough autopsy. The internal horrors they documented revealed it was a miracle he had lived to 38. Their report was a catalog of anatomical misery. His heart was found to be unusually small, no larger than a single peppercorn. His lungs were corroded and necrotic. His intestines were rotten, gangrenous, and full of decay. And they recorded one final, telling discovery. He possessed only a single testicle. It was described as black as coal, a sign it had atrophied and died long before he did. This solitary piece of flesh held the ultimate answer. Modern geneticists and historians concur. Charles II was almost certainly completely sterile. His tragic existence is a stark biological lesson on the catastrophic price of absolute power, the danger of genetic obsession, and the fact that sometimes the downfall of an empire can be foretold in the crumbling anatomy of its last king. If you were captivated by this deep dive into one of history's most tragic figures, please show your support. A like on this video genuinely helps the channel Wines of Thought continue our mission to unearth history's most compelling and forgotten stories.